As of right now, Trackerly users are able to use a new function inside the app, which I believe is going to change the way that we track visibility in LLMs. And in this quick video, I want to show you just a simple example. So for the past 2 months, I've been tracking a single prompt in this case, which is what are the best alternatives to Goodreads? And someone I know is working on this app called Hardcover. It's an app that is basically a good alternative for Goodreads. And so based on a bunch of responses, you can see that hardcover has been mentioned 51 times, which is cool. And if I track the mentions over time, you can see that, well, yeah, it's been mentioned here and there in the AI's responses. But what this doesn't show yet is where in the response does this brand show up. For example, right in this perplexity response on the 6th of February, you can see that it's halfway through the response. So in this sense, the story graph, which is probably a competitor, is doing slightly better. If I scroll all the way down to another response here, alternatives to Goodreads, you can see that they are in 5th position. And if I scroll all the way further, you know, it changes. Sometimes it's in 4th, sometimes it's in 5th. Right here it's on 8th position. So as you can see, it goes up and down and up and down. But what if you want to get a feel of the average trend? Does your position in these AI responses grow or decrease? Well, as of today, Trackerly users can see this new metric that we've created, which is called relative position of first mention. And this may sound like a mouthful, but what this does is that it calculates where in the AI's response does your brand feature. And in this case, on the 6th of February, the brand is mentioned in the top 36% into the response. So in this case, if you're all the way up in the top 10%, you are presented prominently at the start of the AI's response. Whereas if you're all the way down in the 100% range, that means that your answer, your brand, is mentioned all the way at the bottom of the response, and therefore the amount of impressions and clicks you'll be able to generate to your brand will be much less compared to what it could be if you were mentioned all the way at the top of the answer. And so this shows an interesting trend. So right when I started tracking this brand, it was presented all the way up in the top half of the answer, but over time it started to decline a little, and now it's really volatile, right? So this is just one example. I want to show you another example, which I've actually collected a lot more data for. So from December 2024, I've been asking all these AI models about the best email marketing tools. And as you can see, I've collected loads of results. And so, well, let's have a look at the position tracking of these different brands. So let's look at ConvertKit, an email provider that I've used quite a lot in my career. And it's obviously got a load a bit because, you know, it's got to dig through all these responses. But based on the data that I've collected, ConvertKit is mentioned in 291 responses. And if I go down to the analytics, then you can see that on some days they are mentioned in an AI's response, whereas on some other days they are left out, which explains the volatility here. But if you look at the average position here, it's relatively stable. They're not all the way at the top. They're sitting about 2/3 of the answer down. You can also narrow it down to a specific AI provider. Trackerly tracks 5 of them every single day. But let's just say that I just want to focus on OpenAI. That changes it a little bit. So right now, ConvertKit has only gotten 133 mentions. Well, I say only, but it's actually quite decent. So let's have a look at the average position in ChatGPT. And it's sitting in this 2/3 range. So you have to read about half the answer before ConvertKit is mentioned. And I'm going to show you a quick example here where you can see, like, hey, there's this big answer. What is the best email marketing tool? Well, MailChimp is the top response here. And I have to scroll quite a bit down before I get to ConvertKit. Well, and let's compare this. Let's create a nice little comparison here. So let's look at HubSpot and let's look at ActiveCampaign, because that's a big one too. And of course, let's look at MailChimp. And let's look at a company that's a bit smaller perhaps. Well, let's look at Drip. And so this is quite interesting. So the top 4 brands that I've added, they have been mentioned in each of OpenAI's responses. So if you just look at the share of voice, it doesn't tell you that much, because as we've seen, ConvertKit sometimes is all the way at the bottom of the recommendations. So that mention doesn't carry as much weight as a mention at the top of the response would, whereas drip sometimes isn't mentioned at all. And so it shows in the share of voice, which is quite stable. Drip occasionally pops in and pops back out again, but the other 4 brands that I track are quite stable. But then let's look at the position tracking, and this is way more interesting to me. And this shows that MailChimp is consistently one of the first companies that is recommended, whereas HubSpot is also doing really great. This paints a very clear picture, whereas yes, ConvertKit may be mentioned every single time, but their recommendation is one of the lowest in the AI's response. So in that sense, yes, you are visible, but you're not as visible as you could be. And drip, for example, here, it's hovering a little at the bottom of the AI's response, which is basically comparable to being on page 1 of Google, but still at the bottom of the range, skipping from page 2 to page 1 to page 2. You really get very little impressions at this point, and the click-through rate to your company can be dramatically worse than the top 1 position. So as of right now, every Trackly user gets to use this option. It's included in all the plans, and it can show you a lot about how your brand is visible in each of those LLMs. So I do suggest you head on over to Trackly AI to check it out. There's a free 7-day trial where you can test it out as much as possible. You get full access to the tool. In 7 days you get a feel of what it can do and how it can help you get a grip on your brand's visibility in AI. Well, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.